Right. And then, so for those that are considering listing their home at some point this year, what are some things that you talk about in your course that you think are very important for sellers to start thinking about now
Yeah.
versus the when they're ready to pull the trigger?
Well, the first thing I tell people, they need to check with their sphere of influence before they sell their house. Find out who you know and who they know that are looking to buy a 4-bedroom, 3-bath home in your neighborhood. Because it is amazing how often I've done that with my sellers before we listed and they ended up finding somebody. Then I would get paid to basically write out the contract and to follow it through. And it was a win-win for everybody. So you owe that to yourself. You've got a huge sphere of influence these days with your Instagram, with your social media, with your neighbor's social media, that you can do that. The biggest mistake people make, though, is pricing it wrong, whether they're selling it for sale by owner or trusting a real estate agent to list it, to price it fairly. I've gone up against real estate agents and I've lost the listing to agents that have told the seller 10% more than the market price to get the listing. And then those houses didn't sell. But we call it buying the listing. It's a very common practice. And it's a shame, and it wastes the seller's time. It wastes their equity, because by the time it does get priced correctly, it's been on the market for a long time, and a stale house just doesn't command the same price after it's been on the market for a certain number of days. So you've got to make sure you price it correctly. So I usually tell people to do a couple of different things. One, go ahead and get an appraisal. You can pay for an appraisal. Different markets and different price homes are going to be different, but $500 or so. And you can get not like a bank appraisal, so it's a little different than a lender. It's going to be an appraisal of value. And then is your home $500,000 or is it $485,000? You don't want to price a $500,000 home at $509,000, because if it's in a $485,000 neighborhood, it's never going to be found. And then that way, though, and then you've got evidence, right? I'm selling for sale by owner. Here's an appraisal. My home is worth $485,000. It's hard for an agent to argue against that. It's hard but as an agent, I know agents overprice homes all the time. But if I come in and I've got a buyer and you have an appraisal showing me that the appraiser says the home is worth $500,000, not the real estate agent, that holds a lot more value, because we are not qualified to be appraisers. We can only give an opinion of value.
Right. It's funny you mentioned that, because, on a lot of those forums, they'll say, well, my agent told me my home is going to be worth this, and why wouldn't I? I'm like, well, you should get options. But like, if an agent's pricing was accurate, like, lenders would use it. But there's a reason why lenders use an appraisal versus like an agent's opinion on things.
My parents just, it's funny. They actually called agents and they didn't call me first. And my mother called me and she's like, we got 3 different, we had agents telling us everything from $475,000 to $575,000 for our home. And I'm like, it's probably somewhere in the middle. And so I went this was in North Carolina, and interviewed agents and found out what the right price was, talked to an appraiser. The other thing that we did that I think is really advisable a lot of times is we went ahead and did the inspection. Now, again, the way the industry operates, you put your house on the market, you say it's this price, then you get the buyer to do the inspection, and then the buyer comes back and says, I know we offered you $500,000, but now we want to offer you $485,000 because we found all these things wrong. The seller's unhappy, the buyer's unhappy because the seller doesn't want to come down the price. Why don't we operate like CarMax? You go in, here's the car, here's the Carfax. This is what's, we fixed everything that's wrong, and this is the price.
Right.
And that's really the way it doesn't work. But again, Bobby wrote another great article last week, Bobby Bryant, the founder of DOS, on how real estate industry, the agents really operate as gatekeepers. And that's one of the way they stay relevant, and they continue to charge these 3%, because it's a very complicated process. But technology really allows it to not be so complicated anymore. But if we make it less complicated, then we even create less work for the real estate agents to do. And it's even harder for them to justify those fees. And it's not the agents that are making the money. Again, you have to go back and look at who's making the money in this industry, and it's not your real estate agents.